There was a specific moment, maybe after a trade that should have worked, that followed all your rules and still went wrong when you sat in front of that screen and thought, maybe I'm just not built for this, not as a passing thought, as a verdict, as something quiet and final settling into your chest, like a door closing somewhere deep in you. And the terrifying thing about that moment isn't how dark it is, it's how calm it is. It doesn't feel like a breakdown, it feels like a conclusion, like your mind has finished sorting through the evidence and arrived at an answer you didn't want but can't argue with. I know that moment. I know the specific weight of it. And I want to tell you something about it right now before we go anywhere else in this conversation, because it changes everything that comes after. That moment isn't the sign that you should quit. It's the sign that you've just arrived at the one stage every real trader passes through, the stage that comes before discipline, the stage that creates it. And it's the stage that almost nobody in trading education talks about because it doesn't look like progress. It looks like failure. It feels like failure. But it is the most important thing that will ever happen to you as a trader if you let it mean the right thing. Discipline isn't something you build before you trade well. That's what you've been told. That's what every course, every book, every mentor has placed at the beginning of the process. Get disciplined first, then trade. Manage your psychology, control your emotions, build your rules and follow them. But here's what that advice gets completely wrong. Discipline isn't something you build before the losses. It's something the losses build inside you if you let them. You don't practice your way to it. You get broken into it. The same way a callus doesn't form because you decide to have thicker skin. It forms because you stayed in contact with friction long enough and your body adapted. You cannot manufacture a callus. You can only earn one. The traders who found real discipline, the ones who eventually stopped fighting their own minds every time they sat down at a screen, they didn't get there by finally getting disciplined enough. They got there by passing through a stage that most people either quit before reaching or fight so hard against that they never actually move through it. That stage has a shape. It has a texture. And if you know what it is, you can stop mistaking it for evidence that you're failing and start recognizing it as evidence that something is actually being built. But we need to go back. We need to go back to the beginning of what this stage looks and feels like, because I don't think you've ever had someone sit down with you and name it clearly. And that naming, that's what changes the relationship you have with where you are right now. I want to tell you about a trader I'll call Michael. This isn't a story about someone who failed. This is a story about someone who did everything right, everything he was told was right, and still couldn't make it work, because Michael was disciplined. Or at least, he was trying to be, which he believed was the same thing. He had rules, detailed, carefully thought out rules. Maximum loss per trade, maximum loss per day, a specific setup he would only take if 3 conditions aligned. He kept a journal. He reviewed his trades every night. He read the books, not just one, all of them. He spent 2 years before he put real money in the market doing exactly what he was supposed to do. And when he finally started trading with real capital, he lasted about 3 months before he started breaking every rule he'd spent 2 years building. Not dramatically, not recklessly. He'd break one rule, just slightly. Move a stop a little further because the trade felt right. Take a second position when he was already in one because he was so certain. Close a winner early because the gain felt more comfortable than the uncertainty. And every time he broke a rule, he'd sit down afterward and make the rule stricter. New rule: I will never move my stop once it's set. New rule: I will only take one position at a time, no exceptions. New rule: I will hold until my target is hit. And then he'd break those rules too, and the cycle would reset. He spent 2 years trying to be disciplined and ended up in a worse relationship with himself than when he started. Because what he was actually doing, what no one had ever named for him, was treating every loss, every deviation, every broken rule as evidence of personal inadequacy, as a verdict on who he was as a person. And from that place, discipline isn't something you build. It's something that keeps collapsing under the weight of what outcomes mean to you. He told me later that the breaking point wasn't a big loss. It was a small one. A trade he'd taken perfectly followed every rule, taken exactly the right size, set the stop exactly where the plan said, and it stopped him out for a modest loss. a completely normal, expected part of trading loss. And he sat there afterward and felt a rage he didn't understand, not at the market, at himself, for doing everything right and still losing. And that rage told him something important, but he wasn't ready to hear it yet. He stopped logging in. Not in a dramatic way, he just didn't open the platform one morning, and then not the next morning. He told himself he was taking a break, but really, he was sitting in the silence of it. The silence of having tried everything he knew how to try and still ending up in the same place. He said later that in those first few days of not logging in, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years: relief. Not the relief of giving up, he wasn't sure he had given up, but the relief of not being at war for a few hours, of not waking up with a number in his head, of not measuring himself against a profit and loss statement the moment his eyes opened. And that relief told him something. It told him that somewhere in the last 2 years, trading had stopped being something he was doing and had become something that was happening to him. And in that silence, something started to crack open. Not his resolve, something else, something that had been in the way. I want to stop for a second and talk to you directly. Not as a narrator, not as someone sharing a parable. I want to speak to you as a person sitting across from me right now. Because what I'm about to say is the most important thing in this entire conversation, and I want you to feel it rather than just hear it. The stage before discipline isn't failure, it's the refusal to accept what failure is trying to tell you. Sit with that for a moment, because this changes the entire framing of where you are right now. Every trader who eventually got consistent didn't get there by trying harder. They didn't get there by adding more rules, tightening more structure, or finally finding enough willpower to override their emotions. They got there by finally stopping the war against what the market was showing them. What Michael had been doing, what most beginning traders do, isn't undisciplined. It's something more specific than that. It's the refusal, often unconscious, to receive the information the losses are carrying. Because receiving that information means sitting with something uncomfortable. It means letting the market be the authority instead of your certainty. It means accepting that the outcome isn't a verdict on your intelligence or your worth, it's just information. Pure, neutral, value-free information. And until you can do that, until you can hold a loss and feel its information without needing it to also mean something about you, discipline isn't possible. Not because you're weak, but because you're still in a war, and wars aren't sustainable. The shift Michael experienced in that silence wasn't a decision to be more disciplined. It was something quieter. He stopped arguing with what had happened. He stopped making the losses mean something about whether he was capable. And in that absence, in the space where the war used to be something new, started to grow. It was slow. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. So here's the first concrete thing I want you to do. Not a mindset shift, a practice, something physical, something you can begin within the next 24 hours, and something that belongs to you now as a tool, not as homework. After every losing trade, every single one, I want you to write 3 sentences. Not analysis, not strategy review, not a postmortem on what you did wrong. 3 specific sentences. First, what was I certain about going in? Second, what did the market show me instead? Third, can I hold both of those things at the same time without deciding that one of them means I failed? That's it. 3 sentences. You don't have to resolve the gap between them. You don't have to figure out who was right. The only job of this practice is to create the habit of receiving information without immediately converting it into a judgment about yourself. That gap between what you were certain of and what the market showed you is the classroom. And most traders spend their entire early career trying to close that gap by being more certain, when the actual work is learning how to be comfortable with its existence. This practice begins that work. It's small, it's quiet, it's the most important thing you can add to your process right now. Let's talk about why the discipline loop keeps trapping people. Because I don't want you to walk away from this conversation and immediately fall back into the pattern that's been keeping you stuck. The loop works like this. You lose, you blame the lack of structure, you add structure, you feel better for a few days, you lose again, the structure fails to hold you, you blame yourself for failing the structure, you add more structure. And on it goes, tightening and tightening, until you're either so strangled by rules that you can't trade at all, or you blow up the whole framework in one emotional session and start from scratch. Here's what the loop misses. Structure isn't the same as discipline. Structure is the container. Discipline is what fills it, and what fills it isn't more rules. What fills it is the absence of emotional charge around outcomes. When an outcome, whether it's a win or a loss, stops meaning something about who you are, something fundamental shifts. You don't get more excited by wins. You don't get more devastated by losses. And in that neutral space, you can actually follow your rules, not because you're forcing yourself to, not because you're white-knuckling it, but because there's nothing inside you pulling against them anymore. The emotional charge is what breaks the structure. Reducing the charge is the work. And you don't do that work by adding more rules. You do it by changing the relationship between your identity and your outcomes. That's harder to teach than rules. It's harder to put in a course. It can't be formatted into a checklist, but it's the actual thing. And the pre-discipline stage, the stage you are in, or the stage you are about to enter, or the stage you've been in longer than you realized, is the stage where this work happens. Whether you know it or not, whether you want it to or not, every loss you've taken has been offering you this work. The question is only whether you've been receiving it or fighting it. Here's what the pre-discipline stage actually looks like from the inside, because I want you to recognize it when you're in it, not after the fact, but in real time. It looks like inconsistency. It looks like following your plan 3 days in a row and then blowing it on day 4 for no apparent reason. The day 4 breakdown always feels like a mystery. You weren't tired, you weren't distracted, nothing was different from the days before, and yet something overrode you. Something moved your stop. Something made you hold too long or exit too early or take the trade you'd told yourself 100 times you wouldn't take. That something is the emotional charge around what today's outcome means. Not just financially, about who you are. When that charge is high enough, and in the pre-discipline stage, it's almost always high enough, it will eventually override your rational mind. Not because your rational mind isn't working, it's working perfectly. It's just that the emotional charge is a different system, running on a different track, and when those two tracks are running at full speed in different directions, the emotional one wins almost every time. Not because it's stronger, but because it's older, because it's been running since long before you ever heard of trading. Because the belief that outcomes reflect your worth is a belief that most of us were handed long before we were old enough to question it. And that's the real work of the pre-discipline stage. Not learning more about markets, not finding a better strategy, not getting a mentor with a bigger account. The real work is discharging what outcomes mean to you, slowly, patiently, trade by trade. Here's another practice I want to give you. This one goes before the trading session, not after. Before you open your platform, before you look at a chart, before you even check what the market is doing, I want you to finish one sentence, just one. The sentence is this: if I lose today, it means blank. Whatever comes after the word means, that's the belief doing the most damage. Write it down. Don't edit it. Don't make it sound reasonable. Whatever arrives honestly is the thing you need to see. It might be, if I lose today, it means I'm not smart enough. It might be, if I lose today, it means I'm going to have to explain this to someone I don't want to explain it to. It might be, if I lose today, it means I should have listened to the part of me that said, I'm not built for this. Whatever it is, write it. Then sit with it for 2 minutes before you start. Not to resolve it, not to argue yourself out of it, just to see it. To name it. To hold it at arm's length, where you can look at it instead of letting it run underneath your trading session without you knowing it's there. You can't discharge what you won't acknowledge. And you can't acknowledge what you won't name. This sentence is how you start naming it. Now, I want to talk about the paradox at the center of all of this, because this is the thing that either sets you free or keeps you trapped depending on how you hold it. The paradox is this: you cannot skip the pre-discipline stage. That's not a comforting thought. That's not something that's easy to accept when you're sitting in it, looking at an account that doesn't reflect the work you've put in, wondering if there's a shortcut you've been missing. There isn't. I know that's not what you came here to hear, but it's the most important thing I can tell you. Every attempt to skip the pre-discipline stage by finding a better strategy, by getting stricter rules, by adding more capital to force yourself to be more serious, by finding a mentor who will hold you accountable, by reading the next book, by taking the next course, every one of those attempts doesn't shorten the stage. It restarts the clock. Because the stage isn't about knowledge. It's about a relationship between you and uncertainty. And that relationship can only be built one way, through actual contact with actual uncertainty. Losses received, not fought. Information accepted, not deflected. Outcomes held without immediately converting them into verdicts. I want to be honest with you about how long this can take, because I think the one thing more damaging than being in the pre-discipline stage is being in it and not knowing that's what it is. When you don't know what stage you're in, every loss feels like evidence that you haven't found the right approach yet. Every mistake feels like a clue that there's a piece of knowledge you're still missing. And so you keep searching for the better indicator, the cleaner setup, the more precise risk model, when the thing you actually need isn't knowledge at all. It's contact. More losses received without being deflected. More gaps between expectation and outcome, held without being converted into meaning. The knowledge you need, you already have. What you're building is the capacity to use it under fire, and that capacity is only built in fire, not before it. This is what Mark Douglas was pointing at throughout his entire body of work. This is the thing that sits underneath everything he said about probability thinking, about thinking in terms of outcomes, about eliminating the emotional charge around individual trades. He wasn't describing a technique. He was describing the other side of the pre-discipline stage. He was showing you what the view looks like after you've passed through it. And the reason most people can't get there from his work alone is that reading about the other side of a stage doesn't take you through it. Only the stage itself does. The traders who are consistent, the ones who seem calm in ways that feel almost impossible to you right now, they are not calmer because they're smarter. They are not calmer because they have better rules. They are calmer because they have had enough contact with loss, with uncertainty, with the gap between what they expected and what happened, that the charge has discharged. The market has shown them again and again that outcomes do not mean what they used to mean. And at some point, not in a single moment, not in a revelation, but gradually through accumulated contact, their nervous system got the message. This trade is not a verdict. This loss is not a conclusion. This win is not proof. It's all just information. And when that shift happens, when the information is finally just information, discipline isn't something you have to maintain anymore. It's just how you are. You are not behind. I want to say that clearly because I know the story you're telling yourself about where you should be by now, about how long this is taking, about the gap between the trader you imagined you'd be at this point and the trader you actually are. That story is one of the cruelest and most persistent lies of the pre-discipline stage. You are not behind. You are in the stage that every consistent trader passed through. The length of the stage is not a measure of your inadequacy. It's a measure of how deep the work goes. Some people take longer because the charge is deeper, because the meaning attached to outcomes is more entangled with identity, because the stakes real or felt are higher. That's not a flaw. That's just the shape of your particular path through this stage, and you are moving through it. Every trade you've taken where you stayed present instead of walking away, that was movement. Every loss you logged instead of closing the tab, that was movement. Every moment you sat in front of the screen after a bad session and didn't quit, that was movement. You didn't recognize it as movement because it didn't look like progress. It looked like failing again. But it was the work. It is the work. The pre-discipline stage is not the waiting room before trading begins. It is trading. It is where the real trading happens, the trading with yourself, the renegotiation of what outcomes mean, the slow building of a nervous system that can receive information without converting it into a verdict. The stage before discipline isn't a problem to solve, It's a process to survive. And surviving it fully, with your eyes open, without trying to escape it, that is how discipline is built. Not before the losses, inside them, through them, by letting them teach you the thing they've been trying to teach you since the first one. Here is the mantra I want to leave you with. Not as something to say when things are good, as something to say in the hardest moment, the one where the screen feels unbearable, where the number feels like a verdict, where the quiet thought arrives again that maybe you're not built for this. In that moment, I want you to say this and mean it as precisely and as literally as you can. I am not behind. I am in the stage that every consistent trader passed through. My job right now is not to perform discipline. My job is to receive what the market is showing me. That's it. That's the whole work. Stated as plainly as I know how to state it. You are closer than you think. Not because I'm offering you comfort, because the fact that you're still here, still watching, still trying to understand, still refusing to accept the verdict you've been tempted to accept, is itself evidence that something in you already knows the stage isn't over, that the building is still happening, that you are still in the process. There is a version of you on the other side of this stage who looks back at where you are right now and does not feel shame. That version of you feels something closer to gratitude because they know that the mess you're in right now is exactly what built them. Every trade you felt you shouldn't have taken, every rule you broke that you swore you wouldn't break, every moment you sat with a loss you didn't know how to process. All of it is in the foundation. All of it is the work. None of it was wasted. If something in this conversation shifted something in you, if something landed that you didn't have a word for before, and now you do, I'd ask you to consider subscribing. Not for the channel, for you. So that the next time you're sitting in front of that screen in the hard moment, wondering if you're built for this, something shows up in your feed that reminds you exactly where you are and what the work actually is. That's what this channel is for. And if you're already subscribed, share this with one person who needs to hear it. Someone you know who is in the stage. Someone who has been treating their losses as verdicts instead of as teachers. This conversation might be the thing that keeps them in the process long enough to come out the other side. You are in the right place. Keep going.